Greta Thunberg was deported to France en route to Sweden. Israel seized the ship, and of course, that's it. It's owned by Israel now. But several other activists are still detained by Israel. I'm going to tell you exactly what's likely to happen with them. But before that, let's begin with what happened with Greta Thunberg. So the Israeli authorities, the terrorist authorities of Israel, they said that they put her on board, they showed pictures, and she's going to France. Following that, she's going to reach Sweden. In the official foreign ministry account of Israel, they published these images of Greta Thunberg, treating her as if she's a criminal after participating on a boat, on a small ship, going to Gaza to try and help the people, have something symbolic. And they said that they're sending her to France. Then after that, she's going to go to Sweden. Other activists are still in Israel, though. And the reason is the Israeli authorities, they asked them to sign a document. Clearly, Greta didn't really have a problem in signing this document, but other activists had a problem in signing this document. And that would delay their release by the terror regime in Israel. It's most likely going to be resolved at one point, because at the end of the day, you're talking about some of the members of parliament in France. The French embassy said that they're helping them with the services that they need. So it's most likely going to be resolved at some point, but clearly they weren't comfortable in signing anything coming from the authorities. Now, they did not go ahead and, were arrested or detained without any kind of action, of course, from Israel. As a matter of fact, Israel forced them to watch an October the 7th footage after they seized the boat. Greta and the others, they refused to watch it, so Israel had to stop the screening at one point. And if you recall, after the 7th of October happened, Israel started to bring journalists to Israel and made them watch videos too, propaganda videos, of course, hiding the fact that they were killing their own people, implementing the Hannibal Directive on the 7th of October. They tried to do that with these activists, but of course they're not fooled, because these people are super aware and very sharp with their knowledge and with their activism. That didn't work, and then they tried to post some pictures of them, giving them sandwiches and what have you. The fascinating thing out of all of this is some of the coverage in the mainstream media, in the garbage corporate media. All of a sudden, Greta Thunberg, that woman who was considered to be a massive activist in her teens, welcomed by world leaders, all of a sudden turned into a terrorist activist. Some headlines saying that she was operating with a Hamas member based in this country and that country. Oh, she's not that innocent. Other people wishing her death. As if, everything turned upside down as soon as she decided to go on this ship to the Gaza Strip. Now, it's not surprising in many ways. However, it shows you the reality of the people behind this media and how quickly they turn on people who they used to support for so long. Greta Thunberg was an icon to everyone in mainstream media, almost. Meeting prime ministers, meeting global leaders, going to the United Nations for speeches. All of a sudden, when she decided to go to Gaza, she became this little devil. Now, moving on to the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Tomorrow is supposed to be the day when the Israeli Knesset votes on getting rid of the government. That's it. Dissolve the Israeli Knesset. The members of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition, especially the Haredi ones, said that they're going to vote against the government, so to take down Benjamin Netanyahu's government. However, now there are last-minute attempts to try and persuade them not to do so. We had this report here in the Israeli Ma'arif. Senior Torah Judaism official tells Ma'arif there is an agreed-upon recruitment plan. According to him, some of the sanctions will be delayed. The action coming from the Israeli state, it's only going to come for those who do not actually adhere to the recruitment demands or are called and then they do not serve. But there were other interesting details that they mentioned in this report. So firstly, we understand that there are attempts to persuade them not to go ahead and vote against Benjamin Netanyahu, because Benjamin Netanyahu, he will collapse, that's it. But there were other things that they mentioned in this report here in relation to the main person dealing with the negotiations with the Haredi community, and he is the member of the Likud party and the chair of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in Israel, Yuli Edelstein. And they said this: Chairman of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee, Yuli Edelstein, knows the details. He understands that the rabbis are not willing to have personal sanctions imposed on the Haredi public all at once. In such law, it is customary to give an adaptation period, certainly when it comes to personal sanctions. But Edelstein insists. According to the senior official, those working hardest to prevent the vote dissolving the Knesset on Wednesday are the Haredi faction. So he's saying that we're trying to reach a compromise here, but Edelstein is aligning himself with the legal advice. The legal advisors in Israel and the judicial system in Israel is viewed as against Netanyahu. They view them as if they are against Benjamin Netanyahu, and they do take certain actions that are not in the favor of the Israeli prime minister, because he constantly goes against them and he tries to have this judicial reform and dictate who is appointed in the Supreme Court, as if they are the legislators and not the Knesset members. If there are no summaries approved by the great leaders of Israel by the vote tomorrow, and we are forced to vote in favor of dissolving the Knesset, the only person to blame will be Yuli Edelstein. And the conclusion will be that he wants to overthrow Bibi. This is the most interesting bit. There have been internal divisions in the Likud party. There have been many people who have criticized Benjamin Netanyahu. Previously, there were calls for elections to vote on a leader for the Likud party. After many people challenged him, many people left the party, like Gideon Saar, who just returned to the government. He was one of those who previously left the party too, and he had many problems with others. Now Edelstein is in this position, a very strong and sensitive position. And according to those Haredi members, they are saying that basically if he insists on imposing these sanctions and going ahead without reaching a compromise, then he will be doing that because he wants to take Benjamin Netanyahu down, and not out of his own genuine interest to force conscription on the Haredi community. There could be a lot behind this, because many people want Benjamin Netanyahu down, including members of the Likud party. And if there is no agreement and there is no compromise between the Orthodox, the Haredi, and the Israeli government, then they would have to vote against. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu, if that's the case, he will try and convince Yuli Edelstein somehow to reach a conclusion with him, to reach some sort of a compromise with the Haredi community, because clearly they wouldn't be going against any sort of solution that would delay sanctions or take the tensions down between them and the government, because from their perspective, they would rather have some time to breathe, some time to rethink their plans moving on to the future, with a smaller requirement to force conscription. So not all the Orthodox community will be forced to go ahead. I mean, there has been a very minimal success with recruiting some of them. We're talking about individuals, really, in what they call the Hashmonaim Brigade in the Gaza Strip, people who go and require certain things like observing their traditions and their religious duties, living life according to the Rawals there in the Israeli army. Of course, again, individuals, you're not talking about any large numbers. The vast majority of them refuse this whole idea being pushed by the Israeli government, but it's causing a lot of problems, and that could lead to the collapse of Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, if the vote goes ahead tomorrow and the members of the coalition vote against, that means no agreement has been reached, and that means that the Benjamin Netanyahu government will collapse, and there will be most likely calls for early elections very quickly after. Now, this Yuli Edelstein is a man who is hated by the Orthodox community. As a matter of fact, the Shas spiritual leader said that his soul is an abomination. Shame he came to Israel. And you might be wondering why he's saying shame he came to Israel, because Yuli Edelstein was previously in the previous Soviet Union. He comes from Ukraine. He came to occupied Palestine in 1987. And like all of the other Zionist leaders, they come, they occupy, and they start dictating. So Yuli Edelstein just spent a few decades in the country, and now he is in this position. And the leaders of the religious community inside of Israel, they don't like him, because they say that he constantly takes these hostile measures with them against any sort of compromise. And now he's clearly not interested in reaching any deal with them whatsoever that will lead to a very dramatic change. Now, from their perspective, they're trying to reach an agreement because they know that any other government, apart from Benjamin Netanyahu, will follow the same path. They will be taking actions that are most likely even harsher on them. But to them, traditionally, it was a matter of life or death. Whether it's Netanyahu or others, as soon as something starts to happen, they need to take action to prevent bigger things from happening, and attempts to try and force conscription on them. And from their perspective, another consideration is, if they do go ahead now with either a compromise or just submit to the will of the Israeli government, the Israeli authorities, that would create a precedent to the future too, when any other government that is less in their favor comes in Israel, they will be imposing things that are even harsher on them and at a greater scale. Moving on to the next thing that I wanted to talk to you about, a new Zionist attack against the Hodeidah port in Yemen. But there's something very interesting in this attack. This is not your normal attack. Why? Because it wasn't the Israeli Air Force. Israel confirmed for the first time that it was actually the Israeli Navy conducting this attack against Yemen. Why is the Israeli Navy targeting the Hodeidah port instead of the Israeli Air Force? In this report here, they said unusual attack in Yemen. The Houthis reported that different attacks that hit the docks of the central port in Hodeidah, except that this time the Air Force was not behind the attacks and they were carried out by the sea. The IDF confirmed and warned, stay away from the port. We will continue to operate and strike with force whenever and wherever necessary. Now, why is Israel again attacking from the sea and not from the land as they usually do? Well, we've had a short comment from a man called Nasruddin Amir. Nasruddin Amir is the head of the media in Ansarullah of Yemen. And he said the following on X. The Zionist enemy announces that the aggression of the port of Hodeidah did not use the Air Force but the Navy. According to the information available so far, the aggression was carried out with 2 missiles on the Hodeidah port dock. It is noteworthy that the aggression using the Zionist Navy came after President al-Mashad had previously threatened that if the Zionist Air Force targeted Yemen again, it would become a joke and that the Yemeni air defenses would confront it with all their might. Previously, the American press also reported, citing American military sources, that American F-35s evaded a Yemeni defensive attack by evading them and that they were almost hit in the Yemeni skies. Have the skies of Yemen become closed to American, Zionist, and other aircraft? The coming days will answer these questions. And we previously had other statements coming from Yemeni leaders saying that if Israel conducts aerial attacks against Yemen, you will see a lot of surprises and a lot of interesting and news that would make you happy. Did Israel obtain certain information about the Yemeni air defense systems, or the fact that Yemen had recent upgrades to their air defense systems, or that they are now in control of certain technologies that would pose a risk? The United States indeed previously said that they were at risk of having one of their F-35s being taken down. And now the fact that Israel is, of course, conducting attacks by the sea rather than by the air is proving that, well, Israel is worried. Another argument is, well, it could be a little bit more cost effective for Israel, maybe a little bit less dangerous. But again, even if we want to talk about the danger element, Ansarullah expelled U.S. aircraft carriers. There's nothing that they did to the U.S. aircraft carriers in the Red Sea that they cannot do to some pathetic Israeli Navy ships. They can definitely do something against them, but clearly Israel was more worried about its fighter jets being attacked in Yemen. And this is coming with more messages being sent from the Yemeni Ansarullah to the Palestinian resistance, like this one here. Al-Ghamari, in a message to Al-Qassam Brigades, Yemen will remain present on the battlefield with Palestine. He's the chief of the General Staff, Major General Muhammad Abdul Karim Al-Ghamari. He, of course, congratulated Al-Qassam for their continued operations, and he is again reiterating that the Yemeni armed forces will stand with Palestine no matter the costs and no matter the consequences and no matter what the escalations are. Clearly, the Yemenis, they reached a stage where they had a deal with the United States. The United States is no longer participating with Israel in any attacks that are being conducted against Yemen, most likely as part of the growing discontent coming from the Trump administration, frustration with Benjamin Netanyahu, and his lack of interest or seriousness in reaching a ceasefire inside of the Gaza Strip. Now, moving on to the next thing that I want to talk to you about. We previously understood that all of the talks relating to the ceasefire inside of the Gaza Strip are between the United States, Israel, the Palestinian negotiators, Qatar, and Egypt. Previously, the Palestinian resistance asked that Russia, Turkey, and China are added as guarantors. Then we started to have certain reports, and there were actually certain actions made by the Chinese, the Russians, and the Turks too, to bring the Palestinians, speak with them, and try and have and play a part in the negotiations and trying to reach a deal. But now Donald Trump landed a bombshell. And that bombshell was the fact that he confirmed that Iran is now involved in the peace talks in Gaza with the United States and Israel. We want to get the hostages back. It's all I can tell you. Whilst declining to elaborate on the role that Iran is playing. He said, Gaza right now is in the midst of a massive negotiation between us, Hamas, and Israel, and Iran is actually involved, Trump told reporters following an event in the White House after returning from Camp David. The US president did not elaborate on the nature of Iran's role and said, we'll see what's going to happen in Gaza. We want to get the hostages back. That's all I can tell you. This is the first time that anyone says Iran is involved in the negotiations. That's something very significant. And are they involved in the negotiations as part of the bigger negotiating plan or negotiation rounds that are happening between them and the United States in relation to the nuclear program of Iran? Maybe, but the president is saying that. That is problematic for Israel. Israel always wanted to show Iran as, the big demon, and they can't, and they're denying officially in Israel. No one is saying that Iran is participating. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Netanyahu always wanted to wage a war against Iran. However, one of the family members of the prisoners of war inside of the Gaza Strip, he is the uncle of Eitan Moore. He said the following: I am certain that Iran is involved in the negotiations to release the kidnapped. He said that Iran is certainly behind the whole story. I don't really care what way the kidnapped are brought in, but I know we can't compromise on a partial deal. We are not interested in selections. We are a family of Holocaust survivors. We have already gone through selections. It doesn't matter if it's through Iran or somewhere else. We must not compromise. So clearly, some of these families of the prisoners of war, they have some sort of knowledge about an Iranian involvement in the talks and in the negotiations. And again, that's the first time that we heard such a thing. Previously, there were attempts from the Biden administration, for example, to tie the ceasefire agreement and a long-term solution between Israel and Gaza and the West Bank too, with a peace deal with Saudi Arabia. The Saudis were denying that they will have any sort of deal with Israel unless there was a Palestinian state. There were reports afterwards that the Saudis changed their mind, and if there's a ceasefire, they're going to accept a deal. They denied that too. However, what we do understand is that the negotiations in general that are happening in the region involve things that are happening simultaneously. Talks between Iran, deal with Saudi Arabia, Trump's plans, and also the Gaza Strip. Now, what can Iran do exactly if it's involved in the negotiations with Gaza, seeing as President Donald Trump is denying or refusing to say what their role is exactly? Well, Iran is considered to be the biggest supporter in arms of the Palestinian resistance. However, the Palestinian resistance is self-sufficient. The Palestinian resistance creates its own weapons. They have their own will, and they have their own independence. Whether Iran sends them technology or sometimes arms them, that's not that relevant on the day-to-day, on the continuity of what's happening. At the end of the day, it's the Palestinian resistance that decided to start Al-Aqsa flood battle without the consent of Iran or anyone else, and without even prior knowledge, without telling them. They just said, we're starting this operation. This is why we ask for X and so to participate with us. Some did, some didn't. And we are where we are. But Iran has a lot of leverage because despite all of that, they have been the biggest supporters. They support the Palestinians with technology. They support them with funds, with arms, and with constant support. Now, if Iran manages to speak with the Palestinians about a long-term solution that would be agreed upon, and that would provide more reassurance, for example, to the Israeli side, that could maybe, from an Israeli perspective, move things forward. However, we're not talking about any ordinary Israeli leadership here. All of the Israeli leadership previously, they were criminals who participated in crimes against humanity. But now we have a psychopath. He's a complete psychopath, Benjamin Netanyahu, and nothing pleases Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu's main aim is to remain in power, and it doesn't matter if, and again, that's an assumption, that's an understanding from myself. I could totally be wrong about this, but even if certain guarantees are given to Israel or to the United States that are to do with Iran and with Gaza, that's not necessarily going to please Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, if we take, for example, the situation in Lebanon, the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, an organization that is directly linked with Iran, ideologically, religiously, in terms of jurisprudence, everything. They have had over 7-8 months now of not firing one shot at Israel despite constant attacks on Lebanon. That is most likely agreed upon with Iran too, because although, again, if we talk about Lebanon and Hezbollah as a Lebanese resistance movement, the influence of Iran on the party and on the organization is far greater than the influence of Iran on Hamas, for example, or the Palestinian resistance movements. But the reason that I'm giving this example is to show that there is prospect of certain influence if Iran can have certain guarantees. Now, nothing seems to be working. Neither the negotiations between the American side and the Iranian side, nor the negotiations between the Palestinian side and the Israeli side through the mediators, of course. As a matter of fact, in Israel, there are many reports that the negotiations are at a deadlock. That's it, no progress, nothing is happening. Every side is sticking to its position, and there is no real prospect of anything being solved anytime soon. The only thing that we're seeing is some of these theatrics coming from some countries who are traditionally allied with Israel, supposedly to apply some pressure. However, that's not preventing the bloodbath in Gaza. So far, Benjamin Netanyahu has been getting away with murder, and people are legitimizing him getting away with murder, doubting casting doubt on the fact that there's a genocide. Now going against people who are in the flotilla as if they're criminals somehow for trying to help 2.3 million people going through genocide. And Benjamin Netanyahu is still able to delay and get his way. That is, unless something happens tomorrow and his government is completely taken down and Israel goes to new elections. And if Israel does go to new elections, there will most likely be someone who is elected who's not Benjamin Netanyahu that will most likely get to a deal and a ceasefire that could be a long-term ceasefire.